I would like to welcome in our studio today Rick Lyman, the chief of the Warsaw Bureau of the New York Times, the bureau that will be covering, from what I'm hearing, Central and Eastern Europe, 17 countries. That's quite an ambitious task. But before we get to that, I'd like to welcome you in our country after how many years? We're talking about the New York Times.
Oh, the New York Times, yes. The previous bureau chief left in 2002. He was transferred to become the Baghdad bureau chief when the war started there, and just been, hoping ever since to be able to reopen it, and finally got the opportunity, and so we jumped at it.
And the opening or reopening of the Warsaw Bureau of the New York Times is actually the reason that brings us here together. Yeah. The Polish radio's external service reported back in April that, reversing a trend for foreign media to close permanent offices in Poland, the New York Times announced, again, we're talking back in April, that it will be opening a Central and Eastern European bureau in Warsaw. Now, I have to admit, we're looking at the International New York Times, which yes. I gotta believe is the European edition.
That's right.
And
there's an Asian edition as well.
Yes, and we are already seeing a front page story from Warsaw by Rick Lyman. We're going to talk about this in a minute, but I think it would be good to start this conversation saying that as a wife of a New Yorker, I have followed the New York Times and read the New York Times, or tried to, for many, many years. So I was actually quite happy to hear that all the news that's fit to print will be, again, looking closer to Poland?
Well, we certainly hope so. As you said, the task they've given me is covering quite a broad patch of Eastern and Central Europe and a lot of different countries. But when we thought about where we wanted to put the bureau, it seemed a pretty simple choice that it needed to be in Warsaw because of the vibrancy of the economy and just the size and importance of Poland in the region. So there really wasn't any question of whether we would return to Warsaw or maybe open it in Prague or someplace else.
And when was the final decision taken? Would you be aware? Was it somewhere?
They started talking. I don't know when they made the decision. They started talking to me about it last December, I think. I'm
asking if I may jump in because we
Sure.
know that there have been a lot of developments connected with Poland's eastern neighbor Ukraine.
Oh yes,
which has brought the focus back on that country and many aspects connected with cooperation of Poland, Ukraine, and eastern frontier of the European Union, politically, economically. Did that, you think, play a role? In the final say?
It didn't initially play a role because they were talking to me about it long before the conflict in Ukraine broke out. But I certainly, I'm sure that my editors are congratulating themselves for being geniuses now that we are here, and it is there is so much happening, and it's as you say, it's not just what's happening in Ukraine, but it's Poland's reaction to it, and Poland being very asserting itself regionally as a voice within Europe and about how to react to Ukraine.
And we have already mentioned that you will be in charge of 17 countries in the region. At least that's what the press release said. What made Poland the base?
You're going to ask me to name them?
Could you?
Probably.
That's a big pool, no? 17 countries?
It's a lot. It's a giant patch of ground, and it's certainly not anything that any one bureau, one small bureau that I have can cover very comprehensively. But we certainly hope to visit each of the countries and to do stories in each of them. But I would expect, because we are based in Warsaw, that the largest number of our stories will be out of Poland.
Would you say there is, I'm sorry if the question is a little trivial, mission behind it? I'm asking also because we know that Poland, that Warsaw was full of foreign correspondents, shall we say, back in the day, including New York Times office. But after the fall of communism, newspapers began closing down as the life in Poland, in their view, normalized, right?
I think that's right. I think that there was a story that Americans understood about this region. It was, first of all, it was initially a story about, Soviet domination and efforts for more independence in the region, and then it became the story about countries in the region coming back to life, and free markets reigniting, and all sorts of development in Budapest and in Prague and Warsaw. But I think that maybe America has lost the thread of the story a little bit. We need to kind of reacquaint ourselves with what's going on here, and that maybe there's not just one news story to be told about the region, but individual stories about the individual countries, which are going in, as you would expect, in many different directions.
That's music to the ears of journalists from this part of the continent and Poland, like myself. You tweeted, I think it was sometime in April, that you will be posted in Poland. Is it your first time in this country?
It is the first time that I've been to Poland, yes. When I came, I was here in May and June. I'm scouting for office space in a house. And I was here for almost 2 months, and I did a few stories while I was here, and I went down to Serbia and went to the Czech Republic. Then I had to go back to New York and sell my house there, but now I'm here for good. My wife and dog are joining me next week. Looking forward to that. My household shipment arrives next week, and I hope that within a few weeks I'm really settled in and unpacked and ready to go.
For good?
They for 3 years will probably be my tenure. I mean, I think the office here will be for good. Might not be me for good.
And how is the office organized? How many people, or what's the deal? What's the logistics?
There are two of us who work every day, full time. Myself, and then a bureau manager, news assistant, helps me with the reporting, and also with what few kind of administrative tasks are needed in a small office like that. Mm-hmm. And we have a part-time accountant who doesn't work in the office or come in all the time. Beyond that, we have a network that I am trying to reinvigorate and expand of freelancers and stringers in all of the capitals in all these countries and some of the secondary cities in some of the countries, and trying to get them to think of the New York Times again when they're pitching stories, and to do more pieces for us, and also to help me when I'm traveling around the region to find my way around and not stumble over the usual potholes.
When the top editors at the New York Times offered you the job to come to Poland, what did you say? What was your reaction? You, like I've already said, you've worked as a correspondent in many countries, not only in Europe. You're part of a team that shared a Pulitzer Prize, and now Poland comes up as an opportunity.
Well, that's not exactly the way it happened. I was based overseas for 4 years in Africa. I was in Johannesburg, South Africa, in the early 1990s, and the first thing that opened up was our South Africa bureau, and they approached me and asked me whether I might be interested in returning to South Africa, and I said, well, I might, but I'd much rather go to a place that I haven't been before than to go back to Johannesburg. I said, well, the only thing that's coming open in the next 6 months is this new reopened Warsaw Bureau. And I said, I'd love to talk to you about that. I'd be very interested in that. And so that's how that happened. And they said, oh, okay. And we talked about it and came to terms. Did
you have much knowledge before that decision about Poland?
Not really. My mother's family was on her mother's side was Polish, and they were it was kind of the dominant cultural impact on my life as a child. They were the ones who were, there were many more people on that side of the family, and so when we'd have family reunions, kind of the Polish side of the family was larger in numbers, and they would Christmas, Easter, events like that were like Polish holidays when I was growing up, and the old, gray-haired great aunts would speak Polish to each other. So it wasn't entirely foreign to me. I mean, I certainly didn't come anywhere close to understanding any Polish, but I grew up, went to Catholic schools, and the church that I went to was not a Polish Catholic church, but most of the family went to St. Stanislaus Church, and it was a Polish church.
So finally, I already mentioned at the beginning of this interview a story of yours that was published on the front page of the European edition, International New York Times. That was a few days ago, and this story was about the topic that we, the external service of Polish Radio, has already covered, which is the growing popularity of American football in Poland, and also the Warsaw Sirens, the first female team of American football in Poland. They made quite a stir a few months ago with their first international friendly. I think it was against France, if I remember correctly. Yes. But my question is this to you: what was the first story that you filed from here in your new capacity as the bureau chief?
Well, I filed a few stories when I was here house hunting. I don't know if you would count those. Let me see if I can remember what they were. Well, there was a string of 3 or 4 stories when there was that the wiretapping scandal in the government, and so I did a few stories about that. I think beyond that, there were a few stories that I worked on that have not yet appeared that I'm just about to finish up on that I can't really tell you about because you never know when the Washington Post is listening. Yeah.
But I can imagine that also taking into consideration the events of the past few days, you have traveled probably quite extensively to Poland's neighbors, including Ukraine.
I have not yet. No, the Ukraine is not one of my countries. It's still covered out of the Moscow bureau. I am probably going to be doing a lot of traveling to Ukraine.
I mean, it is next door.
Yeah, I know. Perhaps the next time around, Ukraine will be covered by the Warsaw Bureau instead of Moscow. We'll see how things turn out there. But I'm sure that I'll be in Kiev before the next month or two is out and probably make several trips after that.
Okay, we'll be following, as always, all the news that's fit to print. We were talking to Rick Lyman, the chief of the reopened Warsaw Bureau of the New York Times. Thank you.
Thank you.